My name is Steve Hafele, and I am the CEO of GiftWorks. We make smart fundraising software that helps nonprofit organizations, small, medium nonprofit organizations, really maximize their fundraising by helping them to manage all the aspects of their fundraising, all their donors, all their donations, all their communications and reporting. And it's really our privilege to be able to host today. I'm actually joined by another member of the GiftWorks team. Her name is Caitlin Mitchell. She's the marketing and social media coordinator here at GiftWorks, and she's the one who gets all this set up. So a huge thanks out to Caitlin. Some of you may have communicated with her, but certainly thanks to Caitlin for doing all the work that she does in getting these webinars set up. You can really thank her for getting all this to you so you can have it today. We certainly count it a privilege to host today's webinar. It's free. We really are excited to be able to bring you these resources that can help equip not only you, but you and your entire organization so that you can really be the best you can be in whatever areas that you really want to grow and expand and learn. We're excited to be able to bring you content, and we're really thankful that you're taking time to invest in yourself and your organization. Well, today we are thrilled to bring you the second of a three-part webinar series by Brent Hafele entitled Living Out Loud. The first webinar was entitled Developing Your Story. This second webinar is called Pitching Your Story, and really, I know I'm excited, and I'm sure many of you are too, to hear what Brent has to say to us today. Well, a few things before we get started. When you first registered for this webinar, I know many of you, you were asked a question about GiftWorks and whether or not you were interested in it, in learning more about GiftWorks fundraising software. If you did indicate that you were interested, then you'll hear from someone at the GiftWorks sales team over the next couple days, and hopefully that hopefully this information, along with GiftWorks, will help your nonprofit organization be the strongest it can be. A few logistical things for today. I know that whenever we have connection, whenever we connect through technical solutions like this, when we're not in person, there can always be challenges of hearing in terms of if your internet connection might not be 100% reliable. I want to encourage you, if your audio drops off, or if you're having issues with your audio, you may want to call in using the phone number from the GoToWebinar email that you received. Certainly phones are probably the most reliable. I know many of you are listening through your computer. And if you have any issues, just make sure you try to call using the phone number that was given to you on the email that you received. Second thing is, I hope by now, if you haven't found it yet, look for the question panel inside of GoToWebinar. The question panel, Brent, as he's talking today, he's also going to have two opportunities to ask questions, one kind of during his presentation and then one immediately after his presentation. And so feel free to put questions you have for Brent. I'll make sure I relay those questions to Brent, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can so you can kind of not only hear what he has to say, but also engage with him to some degree as well. There's hundreds and hundreds of people on the line right now, so we won't be able to unmute anybody, but we certainly can hear your questions. So put those in the question panel inside of GoToWebinar, and we'll make sure we pass them off to Brent. So a couple words about Brent before I turn it over to him. Certainly he's going to provide you some great information today. If you don't know already about Brent, he has a nonprofit consulting practice called New Day Nonprofit Solutions, which is based out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Brent is a friend to GiftWorks. We are certainly honored to have him here with us today to share information with you. And so without any further hesitation, I'm going to turn it over to Brent. Brent, thanks for taking time to be with us today and sharing this information with all the hundreds of people that are on the call right now.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for checking in today on the Live Out Loud part 2 of this webinar. There certainly was a lot of excitement from the last webinar that we did, a lot more than I had anticipated. I had so many really good questions during the session, and then after the session, I offered an opportunity to do a free initial consultation. And there were so many people that called and said, I've got more questions, I want more information. And in a 3-part webinar, in just 3 hours, it's not possible to give you all the information that you need to do this. But my goal today is to take you through, and through this webinar series, is to take you through steps that can help you move your public relations program and your media relations program further, farther, and faster. I do want to reiterate what Steve talked about. In about 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to be doing some question and answer period in the middle of the session. And so this is just so that as you have questions, feel free. Please put some information or ask the questions as you come up with them. If you have them, I guarantee you someone else has them as well. Today's agenda is we're going to go through a brief review of the last session, just to catch everybody up and remind you of what we talked about. And then we're going to talk about pitching your story to the media. And we'll be going through press releases and other methods of getting your story out, and then media lists. This is the series, or this is the seminar of the three that is not quite as exciting. And I just got to be honest with you from the beginning. And the reason is that a lot of it is technical, and it's a lot of formatting things and making sure stuff is in the right places. But it's really important because in order for your story to get noticed, in order for your story to get into the right place, we need to make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted and everything is in the right place. And so stick with us. We're going to get through this just fine, and hopefully we'll be able to take your questions and your programs and your press releases to the next level. So thank you so much for being on the call. From last time, one of the first questions I started with is who reads, watches, and listens to the news? And as we went through some of the demographics, upper income individuals who are often the best users of or consumers of the news are upper income, well-educated, typically older, median ages of 55, 65 years of age. And so these are individuals who look a lot like our donors, like our volunteers, like our advocates. And so these are people that we want to attract the attention to. And the real goal of public relations, as such, is to become a news beat. You want to have such great partnerships with your media agencies that you become a news beat. And a news beat we defined as simply having such a great reputation and relationship with the news media that they call you for stories, that they come to you when they need information and they need a source. And so when you build that relationship up, that's when you know that you're doing a good job with your PR program. And one of the reasons why this is important is that media, press stories, are in many ways an editorial endorsement. They say that you're worthy to be talked about, that your program is worthy to be mentioned, that you are a credible source. And so it's important that we have good public relations programs to build for your fundraising programs, for your volunteer programs, for building credibility if you're lobbying or you're doing advocacy work. Any of those things is very important to get the public to see you and to know who you are. It's often said in marketing, various different marketing studies, that it takes 7 impressions of your brand in order for it to become recognized. This is one of those ways that before you send an acquisition letter, or before you go out to meet with an association such as a Kiwanis Club or a community group, that they know who you are ahead of time and can be effective in that way. So last time I introduced just a very simple media relations process, just 4 simple steps. But when you break them down, you can focus on where you go and how you get these steps taken care of. So that first stage is what we talked about last time, which was developing your story. And in developing your story, the basic concept is figuring out what story do you want to tell, what story do you have to share. The next one is to pitch your story, and that we're going to talk about today. The next session, part 3 of this series, is going to be on interviewing success and following up with style. And we'll go into more detail in that certainly next time we connect. So last time, we had talked about story ideas. And I brought you 6 story ideas that really are a way to diversify the messages that you bring out. And we actually did a poll last time asking, what is the story idea or the story type that you use the most? And out of the poll, there was a significant number of individuals that had events or human interest as their key stories. That's the story, if they're going to send one out, they send most often. But there are other styles. Hard news is an example of that. And so getting getting a story out that really is important to the community to know about the state of poverty in your community, or about how animals were affected by a recent tragedy or a recent disaster in your region. Those are hard news stories that the media needs to know about, and you can be a source for. National news with a local twist is simply taking something that's happening nationally. And I have two examples today. If you are, one is if you work with women, today is International Women's Day. And so being able to send a press release to talk about what does that mean and what does that look like locally, bringing that international story to a local perspective. Another story I saw, the New York Times just covered a story on how greyhound racing is going down in popularity. And the impact of that, if you're a humane association, can speak about how your organization has either helped with that or is seeing impact of that, or the benefit that it is to animals. Human interest stories, certainly telling stories that share a good side of people and things that are interesting. Letters to the editor are ways that, especially if you get your donors, your volunteers to write in, can be very powerful. When all else fails, go into your data, check into your databases or your client files, and look for trends and statistics that you can report. And then events. Events are one that a lot of organizations, they want to say, I'm holding an event, I'm holding a turkey bowling event, and I want my event to be on the front page of the media. It just doesn't happen that way. But sometimes you can get an event story in if you're very careful and crafty in that way. One other as a bonus, we talked about tip sheets, and this is the type of sheet where you send it in, top 10 tips for getting kids to eat their breakfast, or 5 ways to avoid the common cold. And so these tip sheets are sometimes a public service type of thing where you still are getting your name out, but it doesn't relate directly to your organization. Nice way to get in. So today we're going to switch now, and we'll go into some new territory, and that's pitching your story. So once you have identified what story you want to bring to the media, what story that you would like to promote, how do you get them to accept that story and actually say, yes, I'm interested in covering that? And so we're going to walk through a number of those steps in how to get there. One of the most common delivery devices for this is the press release. And the press release on your screen is a press release actually from a client of mine, the rescue mission in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I'm just going to use this as an example to walk through various different aspects of what the press release is, how it works, and what different things you should think about. And for many of you, you've seen a press release, you've used press releases. Hopefully what will happen is that I'm going to confirm some information you already know, and you'll say, yep, I'm doing that right. And potentially I'll point out some things that you haven't thought of before or that are good reminders. The first thing that you'll see is the contact information. And this is really important to have, obviously, because you want them to be able to connect with you. What I don't see organizations often doing, though, is putting either a cell phone connection or a 24-hour phone number on their press releases. The reason this is important is you never know when that reporter is going to be covering a story. You may go home at 5 o'clock, and the reporter might be writing that story at 7 or 8 o'clock at night so that it makes it in the paper the next morning. And so because of that, it's really important to make sure that they have a contact for you. They can reach you at any time. And I'd always give the reporters my cell phone number. In fact, I went so far as I would call and make sure that they had my information up to date at the different agencies that I most often worked with, that they could connect with me very easily and knew how to get a hold of me. They had a record of that. They even had my home number on record and on file. And a lot of media agencies, especially ones that you would work with on a frequent basis, will have a file on the number of their sources, their most common sources. The next step is the headline. And in the headline, very often the headline, you want to think of the headline, and you want to think of the entire press release as a news story. you're writing a news story for them, and the ultimate compliment that a newspaper can give you is to print your story word for word, print your press release word for word. Means that it was written so well, it was so compelling that they just took it exactly and they just published it. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's kind of fun to see. So what you want to do is make sure that you're writing it in such a way that it has a compelling thing. Now, when the rescue mission came to me and they had this press release, originally the heading was simply, and this press release happens to be about the fact that Congressman Mike Pence is coming to the rescue mission for a visit. And that doesn't sound very newsworthy, but just as it is, okay, the congressman's going to visit. Where we found the story was that the congressman is actually really interested in changing and understanding the issues of homeless individuals in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area. And so as he's learning these things, that ended up being the focus. So exploring homeless solutions was the headline. You want to be careful not to put too many words in the headline. You don't want them to be too terribly lengthy, but you do want to be able to capture attention, and the more that you're able to get the grabbing, the better. You need to think about that when reporters and editors are looking at these press releases, and news directors, they're looking at the press releases, they may be looking at many, many, many at a time. And so you want them to be very bold, you want them to be easy to see, and you want them to be captivating so that they capture the attention right away. The second thing that you'll see about this heading is that they're a subheading. A lot of organizations skip the subheading, but I recommend that you do it, because if the agency or if the reporter or editor is reading this and the heading is just, it's kind of interesting, but they're not quite sure, the subheading might be just enough to really grab them in so that they know what the story is about. And when you read this, you're able to see, okay, exploring homeless solutions, Congressman Mike Pence is coming to visit the rescue mission. Very simple story idea, but it makes a lot of sense in the way that works. The next step is to understand the way that press releases and really all news stories are written. They're written from top to bottom, most important details to least important details. And the reason that they're written this way is really for the editorial, the convenience of the editor. Because when you have a paper, a newspaper or a television story or a radio interview or something on that idea, what's really important, what you want to do is you want to make it so that it's very easy for them to cut information. And the reason you want to make sure that the most important information is at the top, and what commonly will happen is if you have a 32-column-inch story and your story ends up being 34 column inches or 8 column inches and you only have 6 column inches, you're able to cut that. And it's very easy. They just start cutting from the bottom till they reach the point where they're done cutting. And the story may not come to a complete end in the way that they write it. They might just add a little sentence at the end of your story. But you want to put the most important first. And that's a little different than the way we normally write. For donor writing or for other things, we kind of warm up our donors. With public relations and media writing, you got to hit it hard right off the bat. And so in that first paragraph and in that first sentence, you really want to make sure that you're getting the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, and sometimes how into that, so that really what is the story, and really punch it hard and make sure that you have those steps in. It needs to be very engaging, or you're not going to keep that editor or that reporter for very long. The next step, another thing to include, is quotes, and to think about the inclusion of quotes. Sometimes media agencies do not have the time. They may find your story compelling, but they don't have time to send a reporter out to do the story. And so they may take from your press release a little bit of information they find on the web. They may write the story in-house. And so having direct quotes and actually having quoting your executive director, quoting your board president, quoting a resident or a client or a volunteer or a partner agency, and actually providing quotes in your press release actually will assist the news agency in in writing that story in such a way that most readers will not know that they didn't send a reporter to follow up and to check. It also makes it just easier to write in general and to make sure that the wording is set right. Some will still take your word for word in there. Now, when writing quotes and when getting quotes, sometimes you may not be the person actually saying the quote. But you know you need a quote, and you know you need it to say a certain thing. In some cases, I've come to the person and said, hey, would you give me a quote for X, Y, and Z? And they will give me those words, and then I'll copy that out. But more often than not, what I would do is write the quote that I found ideal to my story, and then I would take that quote, give it to the person that I'm hoping that would say that they said it, and ask them permission to use that. May I use these words as yours? And most of the time, provided that you've done a good job with that, they're going to say yes. And I found that that works most often the best in writing, especially because you have an idea of how you want the story to be slanted, how you want the story to be focused. And so actually writing someone else's quotes and then inviting them to say yes, no, or edit is very helpful and can be more efficient in moving forward. Whoops. The next thing that I think is important, another point that I want to point out on press releases, is that it really is critical to focus on the story. And I actually had, during one of the free initial consultations, someone sent me their press release after the first webinar and said, would you look at this and comment on this for me? And I looked at a press release and really reviewed it. And what it ended up being is it was a story about how the rate of rentals is way too expensive. And so that makes it very hard for people to access housing. And the story, basically in the press release, the way the press release was written was that this agency that helps with homelessness and housing was working with, or was working and helping change this problem. And really what I read was that the agency was the story. You know, we're helping. And instead what I proposed is that I said, what if you made the story that this national problem is being experienced locally in our city, and we are seeing it. And so we are a conduit, and here's how we're helping to make that happen. It was a subtle difference, but important, because what ended up happening is the agency became the story, and a lot of reporters will look at that and say, all they're trying to do is self-promotion. They're not trying to add something new to the dialogue, the media dialogue. Whereas, wow, we're actually experiencing that that the high rental rates nationally are actually happening here, and they're making an impact here. That's interesting as far as news is concerned. And so focusing on the story can be really important in that way. The next stop is at the end of the press release, and it's something called boilerplate. And boilerplate, I've always wondered where the wording of that came from. And so steel boilerplates were used in the 1800s. These great big sheets of steel were used to make boilers and steam boilers. And then in the early 1900s, newspaper printers ended up, as newspapers were becoming bigger and bigger and actually offering syndicated options, the syndicates would take sheets of steel that kind of felt like boilerplates. They were nice and strong and sturdy, and they would send these sheets of steel with the syndicated column already printed on it. And so they could send those off to the newspaper press houses. And those became boilerplates. Basically, they were text that was repeated over and over and over again and reused. And so today, what boilerplate basically means is information, basically a set of information that is used over and over again on the basic information about your organization. And so boilerplate at the bottom of a press release, you should have some information to be about your organization and be able to explain what that is. Here's a couple things that I recommend in writing the boilerplate and making sure that that boilerplate is set well. First of all, what do? You want to answer that question. You also want to ask the question, what makes your organization distinctive? How do you stand out? You want to make sure that your boilerplate is very factual, and pointing out what you do, maybe a key statistic or two, perhaps what your vision is as an organization. We envision a world where homelessness does not exist in our city, or something on that idea may be in there. You want to also make sure that you have good keywords in there. Once again, as you're thinking about things like search engine optimization, if you put your press release up on the web, which is a good thing to do, you want to make sure that you have good keywords in there that relate to what your organization does and how it functions. And I really recommend keeping it under 100 words. There's some will say under 150, others will say under 50. I think 100 is a nice sweet spot, and can really help promote your organization in that way. Once your press release is written, then the next step is there's two more things that really need to be done at the least. Number one is proofing, and it's important to make sure that your piece is well written. It does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be the best piece of writing that you've ever done, but it should be professional. And it's important to make sure that sloppy mistakes or easy mistakes are taken care of. And so I always had a rule, and I think it's a good rule anyway, is that if I was going to send a press release out, that another set of eyes would have to read through it and make sure that I didn't make any obvious mistakes, and just review that and check it. And it doesn't have to be someone that's exceptionally good at grammar or other things. Just making sure that they read it and catch the big stuff, that's important. Because with news, you want to make sure that you get the news story out before your news story becomes history. And so getting it out quickly is important. Nonetheless, you also want to make sure you avoid mistakes. With sending, then, the couple things that you want to do when you're thinking about sending is, number one, you want to look at what is the preferred method of the agencies that you're sending it to. Some agencies may want it by fax machine. Some agencies may want it by email. Some agencies might want it by mail, actually snail mail. There's a few that are still out there insisting on this is the way I want it done. Magazines are kind of that way in some cases. Certain trade magazines want it by mail instead of others. So find out what the preference is. Most media agencies, though, are adopting email. And so I'm going to talk about just a few rules, a few simple rules for email. And then right after this, I'm going to open up for questions. So please send your questions in to Steve. When you're sending an email, the best thing to do is actually send individual emails to each reporter that you want to cover the story, or each agency you want to cover the story. A lot of agencies will put every agency on the to list or in the blind carbon copy list, and they'll just shoot it out as like one big old bulk email. That's not the most effective way. So sending a quick email, indicate the reporter's name. Eric, I thought this story might be interesting to you on X, Y, and Z. Here's why I think it makes an impact. I look forward to hearing from you. And then post or paste the press release into your email itself. That's the best way to do it. You can also use distribution lists or or like a constant contact type of thing to be able to still send it so that the sender's name is in the to category, not the blind carbon copy, but it's best to do it individually. No, it takes a little bit more time. It will give you better results, though. It also helps them feel special. And I had talked to a colleague of mine, Elizabeth Knight from Plum PR, and she's just a really respected colleague in public relations, and she says it makes the reporters feel special, and special is good. It helps you get your story out faster. Other things with email is don't send as a blind carbon copy. You're likely to get your email stuck in the spam filter, and thus your press release doesn't get through. And the other thing to think about is when you do your press release, make sure that you don't attach anything to that email. Paste your press release in your email itself, and if you do want them to have a formal copy of it, send a web link of your press release. So put your press release up online, and then send a link so that they can go to the web. A lot of news agencies, number one, opening an email is an extra step. They don't want to do that, so we want to make this as easy as possible on reporters and editors. The other thing is that they want to avoid getting viruses and other types of things that can slow their systems down or cause problems with their IT systems. And so including it in the email, which is nice and safe from an IT perspective, is just a really good thing to do. So with that, Steve, do you have any questions on the press releases or anything we've talked about so far?
Yeah, we sure do. We have a good handful of questions. I'll go through. I think some of them you've kind of answered already. I'll just start at the top and we'll go through. Cindy asks, is there a difference in crafting the press release for email submission or mailed in, recommending as to whether it should be mailed versus email? I know you've talked about that, and so I don't necessarily, if you think you need to say anything else about that, we can sort of do that. Just one.
Cindy, I would say that there really isn't much of a difference in format. So next question.
Okay, great. Well, a couple people pointed out, and I don't even know if you're aware of this, but they said in the second line of your sample press release, there's a typo. And they were saying, and someone said, we all make mistakes. What's the best way to correct them once the release has been, well, released? And that's what Wendy in particular had said that.
Okay. Well, Wendy, you have great eyes. As far as a typo is concerned, I kind of went through some of that. You want to get it to the best of your ability, and you want to make sure that it's as clean as possible. It does not need to be a perfect document. The key, once again, is you want to get it out while it's still news and before it becomes history. And so as long as you are doing your best to make sure that it's in good shape, you're usually well. And this was something that I took from one of my clients, and that's sometimes that happens. I mean, you're just going to have that. If there's the key question is the mistake something that is related to a typo, which is I wouldn't do anything with, or is the mistake related to something that is a factual error? If it's a factual error, in those cases, depending on how many you sent it to, you might want to send a correction. Otherwise, you may just want to wait for the agencies to contact you and say, you know what, we actually caught a mistake in there, and we wanted to correct that. So either way, you're typically pretty good. It just depends on the gravity of the error.
Great. Some people had asked questions about the boilerplate, and they were saying, someone said, if your mission statement is used and describes you, can you use that as your boilerplate? That was question one about the boilerplate. Okay.
I would include aspects of the mission statement, but I would not copy it verbatim typically. A lot of times you can get more information than what your mission statement would have. And often what I find is mission statements, sometimes mission statements are written for the public, and but often mission statements are written for the organization. And so I've seen some mission statements that are really kind of cumbersome and difficult to kind of work with. So I would just be careful with that.
Great. Someone else asked about that. They said, should I include sponsors or donors in the story or boilerplate?
I would not include sponsors or donors in the boilerplate unless you were contractually obligated, like United Way sometimes would say that you have to put somewhere on the press release that you're a United Way agency. Outside of that, I'd avoid that. As far as donors in the press release, it depends on what the story is about. If the story is about the donor that gave something, well, then obviously you would do that. If you're just putting the donor's name in to give the donor some special attention, and it's not a press release about that donor's gift or about that donor's work, then I wouldn't put that in there. So.
Okay, great.
Very good.
Someone had said.
How about we take one more?
Oh, okay, sure. Let me just think. Well, let me make a comment real quick. A number of people had talked about photos in your press releases, and they were talking about when you said don't attach a document to a email, actually just include the content. They were asking, what about pictures? And you had said basically put a link to a web page that could contain the pictures. And I don't know if you want to address anything else with that.
Yeah, you could put the photo in the actual body of the email if it was like an HTML type of email format. But typically, you may want to say that you have photos available or that you offer the web link. The story's got to speak for itself, unless the photo is just so good that it's it's helpful in that way. But often at the end of an email, you can either say, or at the end of a press release, you can say that you have interviewees available, you have pictures available. Many media agencies are going to want to come take their own pictures. So it just depends on what that situation is. I would personally avoid attachments, once again, because of convenience issues, but also because you're going to get, sometimes you'll get screened by spam guards or other types of situations, and you just want to be careful with that. Some agencies do have, for example, now with smartphones and other types of devices, they have the ability where through their application you can send a picture to them or things in that idea. And so if you want to use one of their portals, that's certainly something that you can do as well. And when in doubt, give them a phone call and give them a call and say, I just sent this story to you. Would you like the pictures that go with it? So.
Okay, great. We have some other questions, and we can save them to the end. So if you've submitted a question to the question panel, we're going to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar.
Let's do that. And like I said at the beginning, only 3 hours on public relations. It's impossible to get everything in, but we're going to try to crank through some other options here. Great questions, though, by the way. There are other methods in getting your story out, and one is just a simple phone call. Giving a reporter a call that you think would be particularly interested in your story, and in getting the word out to them is a great way to get started that way. Twitter and social media can be another great way to get stories out. And Twitter especially is used right now. Twitter is probably the most used social media tool by the traditional news media and by reporters and editors and such. Facebook is also popular, and Google Plus is growing in popularity with the media specifically. But with Twitter, just a couple things to think about with Twitter. Number one is you want to post all press releases. You want to tweet all press releases on Twitter, and make sure that there's up with a link to your website so that reporters can see those. You also want to tweet anytime that you have stories that a reporter covers, and you want to make sure that you use that reporter's name or that reporter's handle so that it will show up and they'll actually see it. It'll be a direct message to them, and they'll see that you are posting their story. When the story is published, you want to do another link on Twitter to just kind of build that up. Reporters want their Twitter profiles to grow. They want their Twitter profiles to be followed. This is a great way to help them with that, and they will appreciate you for it. Another thing to think about is that when you have interactions with reporters or individuals in the media, invite them to follow you, and do make sure that you are following them. That's another important thing to look at. Those same rules go well with Facebook and Google Plus and LinkedIn when you're working with reporters as well. But certainly Twitter, if you're going to pick on one of them, Twitter is probably the most important for media relations right now. One other thing, in Facebook, you will sometimes see that reporters will ask questions. And those are another great way to get your story out by answering questions, especially when they relate to you. So kind of keeping an eye on them is helpful. One thing as a general management consultant, I don't specialize in public relations. I work in all of the different areas of nonprofit management. So as a generalist, I often will see agencies get really excited about, oh my gosh, I need to do everything on Twitter I possibly can, and spend so much time on social media. And so I recommend that you use discretion in your investment of time with social media so that you're focusing on all of your plan and having a well-rounded plan instead of being overly focused on social media issues. Newsletters are another way to get the word out. And so sending your newsletters, when you have a newsletter that's going to be published, sometimes sending a newsletter out by email, emailing a link to reporters or sending them a paper copy ahead of time saying this is going to be released in a week, giving them an opportunity to see it ahead of time is something that reporters will often appreciate. And then blogs, and provided that you have good you're using social media well, blogs can be a good way to get attention as well. The thing is if you're not using social media well, having just simply entering stuff on the blog may not be as good at actually generating media attention because they may not be seeing it. They may not they don't have time to read your blog specifically, so be careful with that. Now, when you have your press release, we've taken through what is the story, and then we develop a press release, or we develop a way to actually pitch. We figure out how we're going to pitch that story. In that, you also need to find out where are you going to, like, which agencies are you going to send it to. And that's where I think a media list is really something that can be a valuable tool for agencies. I have a comprehensive, a media list is a comprehensive list of sources that may be willing to cover your information. And so what you want to do is you want to develop it. Usually I throw it into Excel is a good place, or a spreadsheet program of some sort is good to do. You want to think out of the box when you're putting this list together. And I actually gave you a worksheet to help you with this, and I'll show that to you in just a second. But you want to think out of the box. What agencies locally, regionally, nationally, in your state, in surrounding areas, may be willing to cover your story? What specialty media sources, such as an agency that covers women's issues, or that covers some trade magazine that may cover your information, or cover your where your donors or your advocates and volunteers may be. So thinking that way. You want to make sure to include not just the agency, but key editors and reporters. If you're a healthcare agency, you want to make sure that you have the healthcare editor, or the reporter that covers the healthcare beat for your agency. Or if you're a poverty agency, maybe there's a reporter that covers poverty issues. That's someone to think about as well. And then don't send every story to every agency. It's tempting to do this, but really tailor the stories, which stories you send to which agencies. And reporters will really appreciate that, because what that means is that you're respecting their time. And they know that if they're going to open your email and if they're going to read your release, they know it's going to be a story, and a good one at that, and that they're not going to be wasting their time when they see your logo. So in your handouts you'll see a few good media sources. And if you didn't download the handouts, not a problem. At the end of this webinar, I'm going to have an email listed. You can send me an email. I'll be happy to shoot you the handouts so that you have this with you. But in the handouts you'll find a few good media sources. And this is just a brainstorming list to take you through various different areas where you can look and say, do I have agencies that provide these types of media stories? So newspapers and magazines, very obvious choice to think about. There's just a growth of news and culture magazines in this area. I'm from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and we have 2 women's magazines. We have a culture and entertainment newspaper that's sent out bi-weekly. We have a newspaper that specializes in senior news and news for individuals that are older, and so focus on some of those organizations. It doesn't have to be just the local daily newspaper or the big newspaper that you're looking at. Television stations, certainly the big stations, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC, any of those, but also think about community television and public relations, or public television, the cable television network that may be around. Radio. People are still listening to radio, even AM radio, and so get online to a talk show and see if you can get onto a talk radio of some sort. And if you go to that handout, you'll have a whole list of different options that you can consider when you're looking at that. And then certainly online is exploding, and so use of good social media outlets is certainly helpful in getting your word out, but also there's local e-magazines and e-newsletters, e-zines that you can get on and get your story out, and people are reading these. The most prominent of those right now is probably the Huffington Post, which is a newspaper that is published online, and so that's something to look at. There's also some alternative ways that are not in the big 4. And one of those ways is what's called a press release distribution service. Some of you, especially in the last session, asked some questions about how do I get my word out nationally? How do I get it to the nation, or my story out nationally? And when you're looking at that, sometimes a press release distribution service is a really good way to get the word out. And how these services work, I just list three. I'm not endorsing these three. I just know the three prominent ones: Media Atlas, Sizen, and PR Web. But how these distribution services work is essentially you upload your press release, and for $150 all the way up to thousands of dollars, they will distribute your press release and give you different types of services and search engine optimization and other things to get your press release in front of the reporters who are covering your types of stories. And so this may be a very efficient, effective way. Going back to some of my PR colleagues that I talked to, they found that these distribution services can be really, really helpful, especially when you need to get a story out to many, many people in a very timely basis. Another thing that's not often thought about, though, is outside organization newsletters, private organization newsletters. The newsletter on your screen is the Canonical from Sacred Heart Hospital, which is a local hospital system in Eau Claire. And they, on a regular basis, cover stories about local nonprofits. They're really passionate about the community. They're a community hospital. They regularly cover stories, everything from employee stories to stories about their employees volunteering at the agencies to stories about the agency itself. And so don't be afraid to contact the media departments or the public relations departments or the human resource department, depending on who actually publishes the newsletters, of local hospitals or chambers of commerce or of large companies, factories in your area. They may be able to get your word out to several hundred or several thousand or many thousand people. And that still is very valuable media for you if it's going out to your donors. And then, of course, the old tried and true community calendar. This sometimes gets ignored, but it's a really easy way to get your word out. It's helpful for online searches. And make sure that when you're having an event that it's on every community calendar you can think of. Make sure that when you're working with, when you have good stories, that you try to include a community calendar when it makes sense. So those are the major thoughts that I have as far as media list, and certainly that handout will be good for you in looking and actually brainstorming for sources. When you're thinking about these sources, a couple places to actually use to look for them. Certainly, when you're creating your media list, think about or grab some newspapers or grab the samples of the newspapers that you're interested in. Usually in the first couple pages, it will tell you what their submission policy is. It'll have their contact information in it. As you look at reporters and as you become, in the last session we talked about actually being a consumer of media and in some ways being a rabid consumer of media. So as you look at what other agencies or what certain reporters write on, and you figure out, okay, this reporter is the reporter that covers the beat on my type of agency. They're the ones that handle animal issues, or they're the ones that handle business issues, or they're the ones that handle education issues. And so once you figure out what that reporter is, often at the end of their stories there will be an email address. And so include that in your media list as well. One other source that's often forgotten in developing media lists or researching grants or researching a lot of different things is the local reference librarian at your local library. And so go into the library and talk to the reference librarian and say, hey, I'm looking for sources on this. Can you help me find this? And often they may even have a media directory or a online database or other things that can help you and can be very, very, can help you move your process in the media list forward very quickly. Our next session, part 3, we're going to finish this up with really one of the most exciting parts of the public press release and the public relations work is interviewing and getting your interview out. And then once you get the interview, how do you follow up with style and making sure that you can capture that next story. So we're going to talk about preparing for interviews, interview tips, tracking success, and getting that next story. So I really hope that you can make it. It'll be April 12th at 3 p.m. and we're excited to have you. One final thing is if you have not sent in or if you didn't get the handout, please send me an email. I'll be happy to send you a copy of the handout packet. for this session. If you didn't make last session, I'd be happy to send you the handout packet for last session as well, so you have both handouts. As far as free initial consultations go, I still want to offer this to anyone that's on the call today. I'd love to talk to you and help you with it. With the initial consultations we had last time, I had people ask me about ask me to edit their press release. I had someone ask, should an executive director have voting rights on the board? Another person, actually I had two people ask about the proper structure of a capital campaign. We talked about when is it a good time to start strategic planning, and how do you be more efficient as an executive director. And so if I can help you with any of these, I'd love to chat with you for an hour and just get to know you, get to know your organization, help you with any of those things. There will be no guilt trips. There will be no hard feelings if you choose not to work with my services. Not a problem. I just know that it's really important sometimes to ask for some qualified help, and I'd love to be that for you. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you, and I'd love to answer any questions that I can.
Great. Well, we definitely have some in here, and I also want to encourage all of you, if you have any other questions, make sure you get them into the question panel. I'll get as many questions to Brent as we can have time for. And a quick word before I get to the questions, and that is for all of you as you registered, the email address that you registered with, we are going to send a follow-up email, which will contain a link to download Brent's handout again for this, and also a recorded session of this whole webinar. So you'll hear it again, and you'll also get a link to download the handout if you haven't done so already. So we'll want to get to some questions. And Brent, someone said they used stream sending for a lot of our emails, including press releases. Can you explain why it's best to do individually? And I'm not familiar with stream sending. I'm assuming it's some sort of, you can kind of blast out a press release to a bunch of people at the same time.
Yeah, I'm going to make the assumption that that's something similar to constant contact or something on that idea as well, where it's a bulk email service. I think the big difference is the difference between direct mail and writing a handwritten letter to one of your donors. It's just a higher touch way. It doesn't mean that the other way is bad. When you go to the store and there's good, better, and best as far as grades of quality of your product, I think that using a streaming service or using a press release service or using or sending a bulk email through something like Constant Contact is certainly in the better category than obviously using blind copy or using or just copying everyone's names in the to category so everyone has access to everyone's email addresses. But I don't think it's the best. The best is you want to give them a personal touch. I think the thing that's really important to think about when you're doing anything related to public relations, and frankly anything related to fundraising as well, is what does the receiver, what are their needs, what are their desires? And reporters want to be noticed just like everyone else does. And reporters want to be given special attention, and because of that, you're able to give them some special attention and actually help them in that way. And so I recommend that it's certainly the best way to do it. If you can't, you don't have the human resources to do it, certainly a streaming service or sending it to a distribution list is the way to go. But it's a good, better, best type of thing.
Great. Someone said, Doug asks, we have 3 local papers serving our community. One is weekly, subscription-based. One is full saturation on the first of the month, and the third is weekly full saturation. Is it wise to send press releases to all 3 or better to target tailored a paper?
I think it depends on the story that you're giving and when you're sending it to them, and what you want to do. Often, it just depends. Some of the papers that we'll send less frequently sometimes will have more in-depth stories, and so I think it all depends on the story that you're sending and what you're trying to, what your goal of that press release is. And so making sure that you are thinking that through and have a strategy with that, I think that's what you need to be looking at, and not. So I guess I would just say that may be a contextual situation.
Andrea asks, can you talk about, she mentions that you talk about finding out how certain newspapers, et cetera, like to receive its news, and she's trying to determine, can you talk about how to find that out? What's the best way to determining how they want to receive it?
Well, I'm a big fan of calling them and asking. That's one thing to do. Another thing that you can do if you're not comfortable with that is reading in their. Sometimes they have submission guidelines on their website. What they recommend, what their preferred method is. Another thing that you can do is talk to colleagues and ask your colleagues at other agencies. Have you had any experience sending something into, WQRS and they can say, well, yes, I have. This is what I'd recommend. And so I guess those are 3 ways to do that.
Great. Someone does ask, and I couldn't remember whether you mentioned this either, is there a day of the week that is best to send a press release?
Typically, you're probably going to be looking at Tuesday or Wednesday. Once again, it depends on what your goals are. If you're looking at a story that you think can hit, the Sunday paper, then you probably want to make sure that story is getting out on Thursday or Friday. There's kind of a catch-22 in that if you send it later in the week, readership on Saturday and Sunday is really good. If it ends up in your Monday paper, I think the Monday paper is the paper that's the least read because we're really busy at that time. And so as you're looking at some of these things, it just depends. If you're doing it to a news station, good luck getting people to watch the Saturday night news. That's really a rough news time. So the 5 o'clock news on Saturday. And the 5 o'clock news on Friday is people are going out to eat. They're going out and partying. They're going out to family and friends and baseball games and other things. And so, really, the best time to get it out is when you have the story. And sometimes you got to be realistic in news in a nonprofit agency that often we don't have a lot of time. And so, when do you have good time to respond to those stories? When do you have a good time to get it out? Certainly, getting a press release out in the morning is usually a good thing. Often before 10 a.m. is really good. A lot of media agencies will have their editorial meetings at 10 in the morning, and so but this is all contextual too. It all depends on the paper that you're working with or the TV station that you're working with, and so really the best thing to do is ask what is happening at your local paper. At your when do you have your editorial meeting? When do you have the most stories? When is the tough news days? And talk to reporters. You get a reporter that comes and actually covers a story. It's a great time to say, hey, can I ask your opinion on a couple things? And reporters are typically very willing to do that. So.
Great. Someone said how much in advance should you send out a press release?
Once again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you have an event coming up, typically a day or two before the event is enough. If the story is already passed, as soon as possible. And so a lot of times, if it's a recent story, you want to send it as soon as you possibly can to get it out. But most of the time, you're reporting on things that have been done instead of things that are going to happen. And things that are going to happen, unless you really need 2 weeks notice or 3 weeks notice, usually a day or two is just fine.
Great. Someone said, do you have any thoughts on hosting a press briefing to introduce your organization to the media?
Unless it's your organization is the next really big thing, and a lot of people think their agency is the next big thing, I guess I would avoid that as a tactic for now, and wait until you have really press release worthy or a press conference worthy information. They want to cover news, and so I would do that more on a one-on-one basis. If you want to introduce your agency, you can certainly give a call to the editor or to a reporter and say, hey, can we connect for 15 minutes and I'd like to tell you about my organization. Most of the time, the best thing to do is just start sending out stories, though, press releases and other things. Get in their inbox and help them to start noticing you. and they'll figure out who you are if your organization is newsworthy already.
Someone said, and this is actually, unless I'm not I think it's about the maybe the last question, and it was actually related to something else you had said. They said, curious, what was the answer to should EDs have voting rights?
My personal opinion of that is no. They should be ex officio members of the board or not at all. What that ends up doing is if you have voting rights and you end up voting officially against what the board is saying or doing, that can cause some tension and some strife that you really don't want to happen. The other thing that it can do is it can lower board member engagement, which is not a good thing, and it just puts the executive director in a really sticky situation, because if they don't agree with something but the board is going in a certain direction, they got to go on a record, and it just I think there's more minuses to having voting rights for an executive director than there are pluses.
Great.
So that's my short answer.
That's great. Great. Well, Brent, do you have any closing comments? And then I'll have a couple of mine, and then we'll be done.
I just want to thank everyone for stepping in. The thing that I think is most important in this entire process is, once again, thinking about the reporters and what they need and to help them accomplish their goals. And so they are very busy people. They need things that are efficient. They need things that are well written. They need things that are ready for them. And anything you can do to make their job easier and to make their experience a better one. The concept you should think of as hospitality. The more that you can help them in that way, the more effective you're going to be in your work.
Awesome. Great. Well, Brent, let me just give you a really huge thanks on behalf of the entire team here at GiftWorks. Thank you for taking time to prepare and to present this to all the nonprofits that came. We had hundreds of people on the call today, and certainly for all of you who came and have spent time listening to what Brent has to gave to us today. Thank you so much for investing in yourself and in your organization. I do hope that everyone here can take what Brent offered and use it really to amplify and enhance your organization, your connection with the media, and ultimately your ability to get your message out and to hopefully, after all that, to accomplish your mission. And that's really why we do. And Brent, I know that's why you do what you do as well. So thank you so much to everyone. Keep in mind, don't forget to register for Brent's the third and final webinar in this three-part series, and we'll be excited to have you all there. We will send out the email that contains the link to this and also the prior webinar, to both the audio and the handouts, and so we'll look forward to you getting that, but also you coming to the next one, the third and final one, and Brent will look forward to that as well. So thanks for your time today, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.